Okay, so now you got all your wiring where you want it in the fuselage. Flip the airplane back over, and it's time to permanently put on the wing screws. If I remember right, the two longer screws go in the back and the two shorter screws go in the front. Now you're going to be worried a little bit about alignment, and you should be, because of the way these wings marry together. If they don't marry together just right, you may have to work a little bit to get the screws started for the wings once you've got them joined. It shouldn't be that bad, because if you can get these wing brackets on and they look relatively uniform, you shouldn't be that far off. What I recommend is you get all four screws set in their holes in place. Start one screw, maybe the back, the long one, get a few threads in it, and then try to start the opposite side screw. And if you cannot get the other side screw to start, no matter what you do with this one other side started, reverse the process. Take this one loose, start the other one. There's a good chance that one of the two sequences, when you start one, you'll be able to get the other one started. It may not be your first try, but one of those two ways should work. You shouldn't have a problem with it. But once you get both started, just get them started, then you go to the front and do the same with the front. When you get all four of them started, then you're going to want to incrementally, I guess, tighten them down. You got a long way to go on the long screws, so you have no trouble just taking the one screw and screwing it all the way down in, but not tight. You still want to be loose. Right at the point where it even begins to feel resistance, you want to stop. And you do the same thing over here with the other corner, opposite corner. Then you come over here and do the back one. I always do cross corners because that's just a mechanic's way of tightening things. Get that one all the way down to where you start to feel some resistance. Then you come across and do this one. That way they're both at the point of beginning to snug, but not yet snug, equally at the same time. Then you go back to one corner, give it a few turns, go to the opposite corner, give it a few turns, go back, give it a few turns, give it to the opposite corner, give it a few turns, and you keep doing that until they get snugged up. And then you can go back and do each one, give them a final snug. Don't over tighten these things, because it's a plastic base that the screw's resting on in this bracket here, and you're screwing down in through foam to a nut on the bottom. You can over tighten. If you over tighten, you'll just bend down the bottom of this cup that the screw is sitting in and maybe crack it. So just where you feel like it doesn't want to go anymore, that you're as tight as it will go without forcing it, that's where you stop. Okay, so now your wings are on, all your parts of your airplane are on, with one exception. There's one screw you haven't installed on this airplane, and the reason is it goes into a recess through these tail wheel doors, and you can't get to those until you open them. So that's going to be our next feat, is to open these doors. So in that, you're not only opening them to get access to that last screw, but you're checking the operation of the doors. And you may, at the same time, if you have this thing set up on a holder that can set upright where you can test the doors and you won't obstruct the flaps or anything, you can check all your controls at one time. I've already done that, and I've gone through the trial and error of making sure the right controls are working with the radio the right way. I probably had to mess with a couple of them. A couple of them had to be reversed. It depends on your radio system. On a tactic radio, you have to reverse the throttle. So what I'm going to do here is, here's a tactic radio. We're going to open the doors. Radio goes on first. As always, I have my radio set programmed with a throttle cut, and that's what it's warning me. So not only is the throttle all the way back, it's also cut. So no matter where I put this thing, it wouldn't do anything until I switch the toggle switch to uncut the throttle. But I don't have my prop on yet either. I took it off, and it's not the point in time where I would have put it on anyway, so I'm glad it's off for this video. Next thing to do is connect the battery now that the radio's in and everything's in its neutral position and your throttle is is off. Okay, the battery is connected. It's gone through its sequencing and chirps, so everything's ready to go. Next thing to do is to open the gear doors. Now this is the part you anticipate most, because you bought the airplane, you're excited, you got a retract landing gear plane, and now you get to see if it actually works. And there may be some issues with it. It's electronic sequencing. So if while you're assembling and you get things in awkward positions, it may not operate right the first time. You have to cycle it a couple times so where it sets itself to where everything's uniform in the right position. But mine's already been done that way, so I'm going to go ahead and open them up. Very good. Now you notice these doors opened up first, then the gear came up, and the doors closed. That answers the question about does the airplane come with a sequencer installed? It clearly does. So I don't, I can wipe the sweat off my forehead on that one. I just couldn't see it. It was underneath the circuit board, but the plane did come with it. Okay. Now that these are open, you take that last screw, and I don't have my stick with me, but there's a little hole way down in the bottom there at the end of my fingertip. You can see it. That's a screw hole. That is the last screw hole for snugging up the vertical stabilizer. And this is the time to put that in. Put that in and snug it up, and that kind of sucks in your vertical stabilizer on top of your horizontal. And that should finish all your screws for installing or putting together the airplane. While you're here, check the tightness of all of your tail wheel screws. All the ones you can get a screwdriver on anyway, including the trunnion for the tail wheel, the cover for the tail wheel. And I think that's about everything in there for screws on that. The next thing we're going to do, guys, is we're going to hook up the controls to the control horns. It's always a good idea to power up the airplane and see where your servos center at neutral. It sticks neutral, and use that as your neutral point before hooking up your clevises to your surfaces. Now when your flight controls are centered and your servos and sticks are centered and your servos are neutral, your throws on your servos should be right around the 90-degree point. This is on the left side here is the elevator, the right side is the rudder. Now you might notice off the bat here that my servos look a lot different than yours, and that is I did a mod. I might as well tell you about it now as a later. I told you I was going to tell you about some mods. One of the things I found was that the elevator lever was on the opposite side. It was over to this direction, to my left, my finger is. And that made the elevator rod curved inside the fuselage. It was curved in there. And when you moved it full throw, I could see a bend on the rod. The rod did not have that long collar, that plastic sleeve tube over it. It did have some down at the end, but didn't have it all the way. So it was bowing the rod. So what I ended up doing was I flipped the lever. I flipped this lever over to this side. And of course when you do that, you have to put your servo operating in reverse now to get the same throw. That straightened the rod out. And if you see way back there a ways, well, I did slide that too. I slid a long plastic control rod tube to stiffen it up a little bit. And there's a piece of tape that's kind of pulling that straight towards that far bulkhead, so it doesn't allow it to bow when you make the throw. That's just a mod I did, and it's been like that for a year now to keep it straight. Now when I move the elevator, I don't have that big bow in the control rod. that limits the amount of elevator movement. That's just one I did. A couple other people did one very similar to that. So that's why my servo on the elevator is opposite to what you're used to seeing in your model when you get it. Once again, all the servos are neutral, sticks for neutral. If you see the lever for the ailerons, where the servo is right here and the lever is vertical, up and down, which is the halfway travel point, 90 degrees. That's where you want it when it is neutral, at 0 on the elevators. At 0 on the ailerons, you want your lever for your servo to be fairly close to straight up and down, 90 degrees. That way it has full throw in both directions for aileron displacement. Your flap, on the other hand, neutral, with the flap flush at 0, your lever is going to be full aft because it's going to be pushing the rod to push the horn and the flap full out into the 0 position. So when you retract the flaps, you're pulling on that horn, and takeoff position will be pretty close to straight up and down, and then forward would be fully deployed flap. So that's the only servo lever that's not going to be at the 90 degree point with your flaps at 0. You have to put the rods and the clevises on the airplane. They come bagged up, and here it's got one of those little S hooks that goes into the servo lever, and a typical clevis that screws on and with a center pin that snaps in place on the horn, and a little rubber, kind of like a hose band, to hold it in place. You get the semi long ones here you install on the wings for the aileron. It's a little bit shorter one that hooks onto the flap. They're already in the aircraft for the elevator. You just have to lengthen it out and hook it up and try to get the elevator somewhat neutral when you do so. Same with the rudder. The rudder comes out, it's already in the aircraft. You just hook it up to the horn and try to adjust the clevis so that it's neutral. My flaps are originally set to just a half a degree low. I think the left side now is just a hair lower than it should be. I'll make that adjustment again this spring before I fly it. I don't know how it got a little low, but it did. I'll bring that one back up. But you want to set everything to neutral to start with and fly it, and then see where you have to make your adjustments. The flaps on here, they have a circuit board slows the flaps down to a slower extend speed, not like some planes where it's instantaneous. That's my takeoff position. There's a landing position. I probably need to adjust these servos a little bit again. Take off, and close to 0. This aileron is also pretty close to neutral. But like I said, this airplane's already flown to trim.